Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bob Orr, the Dean of the School of Public Policy, and on behalf of the school and my partner in crime in this affair, Ross Lewin, the head of the International Office, welcome you all to this Maryland Global Policy Forum. We are in for a treat today. Our guest is atypical in many senses. We have brought many international leaders to the campus to talk about important issues of the day. Luis Miguel Castilla, the ambassador of Peru, is a distinguished diplomat here, but his training is not in the diplomatic service. He is the former Minister of Economy and Finance in Peru. And for those of you who know Latin America well, know that Peru is one of the biggest success stories of the last couple decades. In the 1980s, I was telling Ambassador Castilla, I was a student in Lima in a very different world, and one of our professors who teaches a course in Peru every year, Tom Hildy, knows the changes that Peru has seen in the last 20 years are dramatic. And I was relating to the ambassador that it's the stewardship of him and his colleagues on the economic side, which have really given Peru an incredible rebirth of what is an incredible country. But I want to tell one story on the ambassador before we turn it over to him for his remarks and for the question and answer. Just 2 years ago, when I was at the UN and working on climate issues, the President of Peru, Ollanta Humala, invited me to come to Lima to meet with his cabinet to prepare his whole government to embrace the Peruvian role in the climate negotiations. They were to host in Lima the key set-up conference of parties before Paris and the Paris Agreement. And when I said, that's fantastic, because we need to talk with not just the Minister of Environment, but we need the whole government. And both the President and the Minister of Environment said the first person you need to meet with is the Minister of Economy and Finance. Now, normally I would say that's just an astute move because you need to talk to the finance minister to make sure you have buy-in or all your grand plans go away. But that wasn't why they told me. And I will tell a story I haven't even told you privately, that at the time, the Minister of Environment said, this isn't just the finance minister. He understands these issues. He knows the importance for Peru. He knows the importance for the world. This is the person who can help us convince the rest that Peru needs to step up its game on these issues. Peru not only stepped up its game, and the President of Peru stepped up his game, he did it with the full support of the Minister of Economy and Finance. And so I want to thank you publicly and acknowledge to our guest today that you bring a level of expertise, but it also proves that your diplomatic skills started before you were named ambassador here. So welcome to the University of Maryland.
Well, thank you very much. Such a kind introduction. I'll tell you also a story. Almost 20 plus years, I was in the job market. And I came here because I was offered a position as a professor, not to the public school, but in the economics department. And I haven't been back here ever since. And there's still a chance. So I think now I can, again, perhaps reapply and use some of my acquired knowledge over the years. So thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to have an exchange of views, a conversation really, more than a monologue about Peru, about the issues we're facing. And I appreciate very much the invitation of the School of Public Policy, Dean Orr, for the kind invitation, and to you all for coming in and spending your lunchtime with me. We are actually many Latin American countries. I think we're at a critical juncture. We've had very good years. The past 10 years perhaps have been very, very conducive to a lot of social improvement, high growth, especially commodity exporter countries such as mine. Sensible policies have been pursued, and I think that's one of the reasons that explains a good record of consistent policies in trade, sound macroeconomic management, openness, private investment, driven economy. And now we're trying to focus, obviously, on more structural issues. And I think for many countries in the region, most of the low-hanging fruits have been used. Now we need to really make sure that this progress that we've achieved is sustained. And I like to see the glass half full. We have a lot of challenges. Challenges because the world has changed. Challenges because all this inflow of resources made it was less conducive to really strengthen areas that need a lot of strengthening, such as institutions. There are a lot of big institutional crises in many countries, and Peru is not an exception. The quality of our political parties, something we were just discussing before here, how representative they are, the resilience of our democracies, really. Issues that you were able to really hide below the carpet and ignore, given the boom, perception, and the boom that we actually endured over the years. And not only in very specific internal issues, such as keeping growth, jobs, development, and more opportunities for all people in the country, but also tackling global challenges, as climate change, as you well mentioned, and others. There's issues dealing with cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is one of the largest threats that we have, and issues that are way harder to deal with. Peru, in terms of the U.S.-Peruvian relationship, was primarily focused 20 years ago on the drug trafficking, anti-narcotic cooperation, and that was the cornerstone of our bilateral ties 20 years ago, and that's diversified completely into a very robust area of issues ranging from trade, investment, obviously, security, but also R&D, working with different institutions, educational exchange, etc. But in terms of how difficult and complex the issues have become, drug trafficking is no longer the problem. It's drug trafficking plus illegal logging, illegal mining, human trafficking, organized crime, and sometimes the solutions for more intricate and more difficult problems are not easy are very difficult to deal with. So we face a lot of challenges. So let me very quickly, for those of you who don't know Peru, we are a small open economy, a country that is 30 million, 250 billion of GDP. When you basically, it's a middle-income economy. Our GDP per capita, adjusted for comparative purposes, PPP-wise, is about $10,000. We've progressed tremendously. I think just 3 or 4 facts tell you the story what's happened in the past 15 years. Our GDP has multiplied by 2.5 times in dollar terms in 15 years. Our poverty has fallen from over 60 to close to 20%. Our trade has multiplied by 6. Our FDI has multiplied by 10. Our middle class has we have a middle class that is close to half of the population. Inequality, which is very pervasive, very persistent phenomenon in many Latin American countries, has gone down. And that has been due to a series of consistent policies that I've outlined in terms of trade, investment policies, getting macro foundations right. And that has dealt fast-growing economy and all the progress I've explained. Now, the key issue, I think, for a country like Peru is how to sustain this progress in a very, very challenging world in which commodity prices are obviously down, in which there's risk aversion, and we have global challenges in climate change and geopolitics, security issues, organized crime, how to deal with challenges and continue the trend towards a higher income economy. Given the fact that we do have a lot of challenges in front of us, let me talk about the short-term challenges and then the medium-term challenges, and then really engage in a talk with you. I think the short-term challenge, and perhaps it's something that is in the mind of policymakers, and we have elections in 10 days in Peru, is really how to be able to keep on the progress such that there is no risk of reversal of the social progress that we've achieved so far. I think that's a worry of many Latin American leaders seeing setbacks in social progress. So I think that's something that would keep up, would disturb the sleep of presidents, of ministers, of leaders in different emerging markets. The other related issue is how to be able to fulfill the high expectations that have been generated of new consumers, of people that didn't have access to basic services that do have access to basic services, or to people that prefer to be informal because they don't perceive the benefits of being formal. They rather not pay taxes. They rather comply with labor standards because they don't see in their own cost-benefit analysis, they don't see it as a rational decision for them. So these are the issues, again, in a more hostile environment. And I would say one important thing is, how subject we are to crisis, be it a collapse in commodity prices, which has happened. It's been the worst one we've had in our history the past 5 years, even worse than the one that we had in the midst of the global financial crisis in 2009, a sharp decline in our commodity prices, and this dependence on a China-driven, demand for raw materials. We're now seeing the limits of that, and the urgent need to diversify the economy, which is something that is not easy to do because a government doesn't decide how to diversify. It just creates the conditions for this to happen, the enabling conditions. So that's one thing. All this capital inflows and outflows, mainly outflows now, because there's more, there's volatility and there's risk aversion. And those are issues that are real. Markets are very volatile, but if you see the general trends of FDI coming into the world, less FDI is coming to emerging markets. In extractive projects in the mining industry, for instance, or in infrastructure projects, which are two important sectors that are key for Peru, for instance. So here the resilience of the country is going to be tested. And I think what you did in the years of boom are going to make a difference of how you do in the future. Some countries used all their savings, they consumed everything, and some others invested in goods and services that are of value for the population. and others indebted themselves way beyond their means. In our case, we decided that we needed to do at least two things. One is to strengthen our solvency. We are a country almost without debt. Our net debt to GDP ratio, net meaning you deduct the assets that the Treasury has, not the reserves from the central bank, is 3% of GDP. Comparable figures in Colombia, 40, in Brazil, 60, US, Japan, over 100. So, very solvent country to be able to face this transition that we are seeing that's going to take several years. Buffers of savings to be able to deal with all this volatility. And the other thing is investing in areas that perhaps we should have been investing a long time ago, which is in capital, in human capital and physical capital. A lot of our growth had been because of the reforms that we undertook in the early 90s that boosted productivity. But still, if you compare the levels of productivity here in the US, for instance, in Peru, in the US it's 100, and Peru is below 30%. 100%, it's less than a third of the US productivity. So there's still a huge gap to be filled in terms of being more productive, more efficient, to be able to compete in global markets. And productivity that leads to better wages and better livelihood for people. So that's, in the one sense, the issue that is facing many countries. The crisis in Brazil, for instance, which is a deep fiscal crisis. And the remedy is more, contractionary policies to be able to regain confidence. It is really a test for the largest country in Latin America. Fortunately, we have been able to be quite, consistent over the years. And when one asks me why Peru is different, it's because Peru reached rock bottom. When Dean Orr was living in Peru, was a time in which we reached rock bottom, a failed state, negative reserves, outcasts from the financial system, hyperinflation, terrorism, and the Peru of today is very different. So being resilient in this process is something that is the short-term challenge. What are the medium-term challenges? I would say continue investing heavily in human capital, especially improving the quality of such investment is critical. It's not an issue of just throwing in resources. It's doing a lot of capacity building and trying to have the skills that we need to be able to compete in global markets. Trade is very much related to skill generations. We are party to TPP. We are presiding APEC this year. We're presiding the Pacific Alliance this year. And for us, trade has been an enabler of change, not only because of the trade and investment that it generates, but also because it obligates the country to commit to higher standards in labor, environment, and even work towards having better governance, which is a critical, most urgent issue to deal with. So not only human capital, but also physical capital. We have still gaps in infrastructure. And logistic costs are very high in Peru, a country that has over 90% of its trade under some sort of preferential trade agreement. And for us, TPP means accessing new markets, but keeping on this policy of improving, the rules that govern our engagement with the rest of the world. So that's a second challenge. A third one is diversifying our economy. Peru's economy, 60% of its exports are commodities. And the smart way is not to give your back towards commodities. These are natural endowments that you've been blessed with, but how to leverage development using wisely and in a sustainable way those endowments. Pretty much the way that countries have done in different parts of the world. The Australias, the Canadas, the Scandinavian countries are countries very, very rich in natural resources. And applying, knowledge, innovation, they've been able to really leverage and create high value-added sectors, labor-intensive, and more sophisticated production, paying higher wages. So I think that's the issue that we need to deal with as a third one. Tied to that is having a more effective government. The Peruvian budget, for instance, in the past 5 years, in the past 10 years, has tripled. And the capabilities of managing resources have not really kept up the pace with all these resources that have been able to, we have available to use towards building roads, schools, hospitals, or dealing with citizen security, for instance, crime and violence in cities. So the capability of delivering effectively government services is critical. And that's something, when you see disgruntled middle classes, outside of Santiago, in Rio, or even in Lima, is because people are just tired of not receiving appropriate services. And even in cases where these services have been concession to the private sector to be provided, where the grievance is even higher, as in the case of Chile, for instance. So I think having more government effectiveness is also very much tying as having more government transparency. Corruption, it is a huge issue. We are just seeing everything unfolding in many countries in the region. The good part of this is that some institutions are actually proving that they can work. I don't know many countries in which the most, prominent businessman or the president be impeached with such consensus and with an independent, autonomous attorney doing this job. There are perhaps a few countries that can say they can do that. So that's positive. But that's, I don't think, something that you see all over the region. So building more stronger, robust, accountable, open institutions is something that is urgent, because all this progress really hinges upon that. And that's something that I think overall the population doesn't tolerate anymore. And obviously the risks of pendulum swifts, which I think they're gone because there is a consensus of the middle class that really supports stability. But you really need to have accountable, effective government delivering services at the national, regional, and local level. And that's something that we still need a lot to do in that regard. A lot of these things would mean that you boost your productivity. If you get better institutions, better infrastructure, better skills, more innovation, more diversified productive structures means that you're more productive, means that you can sustain growth. And we still need to keep on growing at fast rates to generate enough jobs to be able to keep up the progress. We, in a way, all of this are means towards an end, because we don't open up to just open up the economy. We open up so that we generate opportunities in the economy. Talking about trade a little bit, given that this has been a hot debate topic, and I've actually dedicated, I think, almost 50% of my time here in Washington talking about trade. And really, and we were actually discussing this also just before coming here. In Peru, there's been a change in terms of the approval and in terms of the perception of trade. When we negotiated a free trade agreement with the US 10 years ago, and I was part of the negotiation team at the time, there was complete opposition by the population and by Congress. I would say up to 80 or over 80% opposition. And after, some years, after 10 years, the numbers have flipped. Why? Because we are a country that has benefited from having rules. We have full employment in different areas, and it generates sources of jobs in sectors that are of value added. And this has actually enabled more formalization of a very informal economy, which 7 out of 10 workers are informal, which is unsustainable, really, in the medium term. So trade is something that we have been able to shift from a deposition towards an approval. And this is the discussion that's being here. When a congressman asked me, of the US, a US senator, a staffer asked me about our views about trade, and I tell them, why is there support? It's because people have seen benefits. But these benefits don't happen out of magic. They happen because they force you to have the right incentives, to accumulate the right skills, to be able to compete effectively in markets, and actually you throw away subsidies, protectionist measures that at the end are harmful for the economy. If you compare countries that are open and bound by rules that are respected vis-a-vis countries that are closed economies, there's a clear difference in terms of the economic and social performance of such countries and how sustainable this progress has been. So I think those are the challenges that we face. And let me end with one, which is politics. Politics is an issue that has been neglected. Political reforms in many countries, campaign financing in many countries, how strong or how representative parties are of people's interests. These are issues that need to be tackled because we cannot really have strong economic institutions and very weak political institutions. At the end, both need to, they actually interact among themselves, among each other. And actually, countries that have been able to sustain progress and growth and development have both. And that's perhaps one of the key challenges that we face in terms of strengthening our political parties, creating political parties, strengthening them, make them correct vehicles so that we have stronger democracies. This is the 4th transition towards democracy in Peru since we restored democracy in the year 2000. And still a young and fragile democracy, in comparison to the American democracy or other countries. But still, we need to really not neglect the attention that political reform in a country such as mine needs to have a very, very important role in the priorities of future leaders. So I think I've given you a long laundry list of things to do. But I think one thing, and with this I end, is that there is a consensus overall that don't change things that do work. Built upon those pillars. And that has been the main incentive to keep consistent policies over time. Different governments, right, left-wing governments, they've been quite persistent in continuing the right policies. But that's not enough to be able to deal with all these challenges that I've outlined for you. So thank you very much, and be open to your questions. Hopefully I have answers for them. Thank you.